435 representatives from throughout the United States make up the House of Representatives. This election, one of those seats, the one representing the largest area of Oregon's 5 districts, is up for grabs. Eastern Oregon represents some of the most scenic, diverse landscapes in the country, and its citizens who are proud to call it home. Tonight, EO Alive TV and the 8 newspapers of EO Media Group present a chance to get to know those candidates better. For them, the race has just begun. Webcasting live from Brent Clapp Studios in La Grande, Oregon, here's tonight's moderators, Chris Rush and Corinne Berjotti.
Thank you. I'm Chris Rush, Regional Publisher for EO Media Group, based in Pendleton.
And I'm Corinne Berjotti, Publisher of the La Grande Observer and the Baker City Herald, and the Regional Sales Director for EO Media Group. We're so glad to be here and glad that you're joining us for these important candidate forums in advance of Oregon's May 19th primary election.
In this second forum of the night, we're pleased to have 4 of the Republican candidates for the U.S. Congress with us.
Earlier this evening, we met with 3 other Republican candidates, Justin Livingston, Jeff Smith, and Travis Fager. That forum will be available to watch online as well. Due to the large number of candidates, we divided them into 2 groups. There are actually 11 Republican candidates for this position, but just 7 agreed to join us for tonight's forums.
Yes, there are 11 Republican candidates and 5 Democrats running for this seat, which is being vacated by Representative Greg Walton. These are obviously impressive numbers. The May 19th primary election will whittle down the field to just 1 Democrat and 1 Republican who will be on the ballot for the general election come November. Okay, now we'd like to go over the format of this forum. This is not a debate, so candidates should address their answers to the audience, not to each other. Each candidate will be asked the same set of questions and will have the same amount of time to answer each question. You'll hear a tone like this when your time is up, so please finish up your thoughts at that point before we mute the audio.
Our questions were developed by EO Media Group editors from all 8 of our group's newspapers in the 2nd District, highlighting relevant issues that are important to residents in that district, which covers all of Eastern and Central Oregon and part of Southern Oregon too.
The district covers a huge geographic area, larger than some states, and has a population of about 800,000 people. And time permitting, we hope to get some questions submitted by our readers from email and Facebook Live.
Before we get started tonight, we'd like to acknowledge the generous support that we've received from CHI St. Anthony Hospital of Pendleton and PacWest Communications for these forums. We're very grateful for your generous support.
We do want to mention again that putting on a live virtual forum like this is new to the EO Media Group. Traditionally, our company's newspaper editors would meet with candidates individually in editorial board meetings, and we would host in-person candidate forums for voters in each town. But now with COVID-19 making these types of gatherings impossible, we're using technology to hold these virtual forums. And we hope we can reach just as many voters, if not more, in this format as we did previously.
The partnership with EO Alive TV was essential in making these forums a reality. So a huge thanks to Brent Clapp and to his team.
And with that, let's get started. Corinne and I will take turns asking questions of the candidates, and we'll let you know the order in which the candidates will answer, which will change with each question. We've used an online randomizer to determine the order in which each question will be answered. So we'll begin with opening statements. So to each candidate, please tell us about yourself and why you are running. You each have 2 minutes, and the order will be Mr. Bentz, Atkinson, Crumpacker, and Bueller. So we'll start with Mr. Bentz.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chris, Karen, for your kind patience going through this so many times. So hi, everyone. My name is Cliff Bentz. I'm running for Congress. I'm a ranch kid, a farmer, former legislator, and I have practiced law for over 30 years, representing small businesses, ranchers, and farmers all across the east half of Oregon. My wife and I live on a 100-acre farm near Ontario, and we have 2 wonderful kids. My family's lived and worked in CD2 for over 100 years. Many of my brothers and sisters' families live and work in such places as Burns, Ontario, Vale, Crane, Hood River, Redmond, and of course, all of these are in CD2. I am and always have been a conservative and a Republican. I fully support President Trump. Not long after his election, I had the honor of helping evaluate the Oregon attorneys whom the president subsequently appointed to the Ninth Circuit and to U.S. District Court in Portland. I believe that life begins at conception. Just 8 short months ago, Oregon Right to Life presented me with its Gail Atterbury Award for outstanding legislative service in support of life. I believe in our Second Amendment. I'm a member of and an A-rated person by the NRA. I believe in lower taxes, less regulation, believe in personal freedom, and I oppose mandates. And I know that honesty and consistency create trust, and that trust between legislators is absolutely essential as a component of good legislation. I'm running because I believe in Congress I can help make lives of men, women, and children of CD2 better. And for example, I'd work with local leaders to understand the nature and extent of this awful virus and the overly restrictive response to it, and try to repair that damage. I'd continue the good work of Congressman Walden to get us back into the woods so we can reduce the insane buildup of wood and brush choking our public lands. I do my best to change the Endangered Species Act so that implementation of its provisions don't destroy the lives of the people of CD2 as is happening in the Klamath and other places. And I would immediately conduct a listening tour so I would better understand how to address challenges and opportunities in all areas of our huge district. My name's Cliff Bentz. I'm asking for your vote so that I may serve as your next congressman. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now we go to Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. My name is Jason Atkinson. I am running for Congress. Like Senator Bentz, I served for 14 years in the Oregon legislature. I served in both the House and 12 years in the Senate. I believe very much in public service. I believe that public service is a calling, and I have devoted a big part of my life to being in public service. Like Senator Bentz, I am running because public service to me is noble. It's a good calling. It is something important to do. And I prided myself in doing the very best constituent service when I was in the legislature. And I think that most of a lot of the work for Congress will be about doing the very best constituent service. For me, running for Congress boils down to 3 things. First of all, especially with COVID-19, it's important that we grow our economy again and get everyone back to work. In the next Congress, that will be the issue that faces the nation. I was the first to call on the governor of the state of Oregon to let everyone in Oregon, especially in rural Oregon, go back outside. I've been calling on the governor to allow county commissioners and local officials to make the decision with public health when we can all return to our lives. Having the government shut down all of our businesses is too hard. Number 2, I'm running because I want to protect our culture, our values, especially the values of family, work ethic, and people who choose to live where we all live are under attack. Social media is under attack, and conservative blogs are being censored. And those values need to have a voice. Thirdly, I'm running to protect life. I am pro-life. It has been part of my mission and part of who I am for a very long time. But protecting life also has to do with protecting the jobs and the people that are in Congressional District number 2. Forestry is one of the biggest issues that we face, and I have a 100% voting record with timber and during my service. But it's important that we have wildfires under control, veterans are served, and certainly I also have an A+.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson.
I'm Jason Atkinson. I appreciate.
Now we go to Mr. Crumpacker.
Good evening. Thank you very much for hosting this. I'm sorry we can't do it in person. I hope everyone is safe at home. I'm a 7th generation Oregonian. My family came in the 1840s and settled down in the Rogue Valley in Jacksonville. I left the state of Oregon to go to Georgetown University, where I studied government and was honored to be an intern for the great Senator Gordon Smith, who was an incredible conservative and someone whose values I really have always respected. I was told by a very smart woman not to get straight into politics, which I was considering doing, and instead to go into business, because she told me that politicians don't understand business, and it's critical if you're going to be a politician to understand businesses and business cycles. So I went to Wall Street, where I've worked for the last 15 years in the energy business, and I'm very proud of the fact that when I started in the energy business, the United States was producing about 5 million barrels of oil a day. And as of September, we became energy independent, which will have a dramatic impact on our foreign policy over the next 20 years, no longer relying on Middle Eastern oil. What you need to know about me and my stance is that I'm a strong supporter of President Trump. I am a staunch defender of the Second Amendment. And in fact, the Oregon Firearms Federation just gave me their endorsement. And this is a no compromise organization when it comes to the Second Amendment. I am pro-life, and I am very proud of the fact that Oregon Right to Life endorsed me as well, which is a huge endorsement in this race, because they are an outfit that protects the unborn and does it from the core. And these are values that I really share with them. So I'm Jimmy Crumpacker, and I'm running, and I would hope for your vote.
Thank you, Jimmy. Thank you.
Now we go to Mr. Bueller.
For having me this evening, and thanks to the EO Media Group for hosting. I'm running for Congress to stand up and fight for the people and places that I've called home for over 2 decades, and to be a voice for people who, in my opinion, have been left out, left behind, in silence for too long from very powerful forces in Salem and Washington, D.C. And no matter where I've been in the district, traveling far and wide, talking to people on the phone, what I hear over and over again is that people are angry and frustrated having their views and their values disrespected and ignored. And even having their jobs, their communities, their way of life threatened by the powerful arm of big government. And I have deep roots in rural Oregon. I grew up in Southern Oregon. I was one of 3 sons of a butcher and a homemaker, 2 people who didn't even graduate from high school. They made it apparent to us that we should work hard, we should play by the rules, and get a really good education to get ahead in life. I took it seriously, went to Oregon State, then to medical school, where I met my wife, Patty. And at graduation, I asked Patty 2 really important questions. Would you return to Oregon and make Oregon our home, and would you marry me? Fortunately for me, she said yes to both those questions, and we've been partners in everything we've done for the past 30 years, raising 2 kids, growing our medical practices, starting businesses together, volunteering, and now being involved in politics. I've represented the people in the city of Bend in the Oregon legislature for 4 years, a wonderful experience. And then I ran a hard-fought battle against Kate Brown for governor. And I can tell you there is no one in this race who has fought Governor Brown and the liberal establishment harder than I have. And I'm ready to stand with President Trump and take it to D.C. to defend our Second Amendment rights, to fight back against excessive taxes and regulations, secure the border, and end illegal immigration. I'm Newt Bueller, and I would be honored to have your vote.
Thank you, Newt. I want to just say thank you to the 4 of you for those fantastic opening statements. And we're going to move on to our second question. What are your top 3 priorities for Oregon's 2nd Congressional District? You have 90 seconds to respond, and the order will be Crumpacker, Atkinson, Bueller, and Bentz. Jimmy, go ahead and start.
Thank you. I think the number 1 priority, which has obviously changed in the last couple months, is getting everyone back to work, opening the economy back up. I think that this is critical for the not only the 2nd District, but for the entire country. And we need to work hand in hand with the federal government to put people back in their jobs, to give them opportunities, and to allow them to really grow their businesses again. The economy was on such a strong footing, and I really think that President Trump did a phenomenal job over the last few years, and we need to get back on that path. So that's my number 1 priority. My number 2 priority is really land management. 53% of Oregon is managed by the federal government. And I think that there's a tremendous opportunity where we can actually open up this land, which has been shut down for the last 25 years, and give people a lot of jobs that they need. So I think that you can take care of part of one with number two as the solution. And another issue that I think is critical is irrigation. And we really need to keep the dams. I think that this is something that across this district is a major problem, not only in the Klamath Basin, but along the Snake River. We need to prioritize our farmers and our ranchers. I think that should be the number one priority of the government. So thank you very much.
Jimmy. Jason Atkinson, you're next.
Say really quickly, I think number one is going to be, as I said in my opening statement, getting everyone back to work. Growing the economy will be the number one issue facing Congress in 2021. Number two, I believe for second congressional district in my public service has been forestry. We have a tremendous need, and in northeastern Oregon, the counties are working together, 7 counties are working together to come up with what will be the national plan for how to merge state and federal dollars with local agencies in order to fight forest fires and to get brush cleaned up and to get people back to work. Number three, and probably the most overlooked, but a very significant portion of this district, especially if you look at Lake, Klamath, Deschutes, and Jackson County, and certainly Union County, is our veteran population. This job is about making sure that everyone has the services that they need. And for me, making sure that veterans have everything that they deserve is a critical step. So I also know from having been around for a long time that the constituent service and serving veterans is an issue that never goes away. It's an issue that is constant. And for me, that will be a priority. So number one, it's getting people and businesses back to work. Number two, it's forestry. And number three, it's veterans.
Thank you, Jason. Newt Bueller, you're next. You have 90 seconds.
Yeah, thank you. Of course, the answer to this question has changed a lot in the last couple of months, and certainly helping people recover from the COVID epidemic will be job one, both health and economic wise. We have to do a much better job in the future so that this never happens again. And we ought to help people and their small businesses do that important constituent work, get them through the small business administration grant and loan process, and make sure their claims with insurers and Medicaid are taken care of, put Medicare and our rural hospitals back on stable ground. So those important constituent services and unwinding this situation will be job one. Job two is to grow the economy. Hey, we've taken a big hit now. We've got to make sure that we have pro-growth policies. That means keeping taxes and regulations limited and low. That means helping our farmers and ranchers and make sure we preserve the dams on our important rivers. And importantly, make sure that we manage our federal land so that we support our traditional jobs in ranching, farming, and timber. And along that, the third is to maintain the traditional values in the district, defending our Second Amendment rights and making sure that we secure our border and end illegal immigration.
Great, thank you, Newt. Cliff Bentz, you're next.
Well, thank you. The first priority is the one my fellow candidates all mentioned, and that's recovering from the virus. I would say, though, that figuring out exactly how to recover from the virus is going to be the most important thing. And I would suggest that whoever wins this race needs to travel the district on a listening session to hear exactly what's gone wrong and what can be done. Because it's one thing to say all the stuff that we're saying, it's quite another to go out and, as I did a couple of days ago, listen to some of the things that are going on, and they're really frightening. So the first thing, sure, recover from the virus and try to figure out exactly what that means. Doesn't mean restoring markets that have been lost. Doesn't mean helping with the tourism that has just disappeared from places like Medford and Grants Pass. Does it mean going into the construction industry as we see housing stall out? I mean, let's go out and find out what people need and how to do it. And of course, forests and smoke are huge. We've got to do something about that. And of course, I would And of course, water. I am an expert in the water area. And when I go out and see people just dealing with the uncertainty that goes with water, it's just really, really, really awful. And we need to address that certainty with more storage and more help for people that are floundering, not knowing whether or not they're going to have water.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now we're going to go into a series of 3 questions, all dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. One is about the healthcare system. The other is about our economic crisis. And the third question will be about balancing the economy with the social distancing measures that have been taken so far. So the next question is, COVID-19 is obviously a tremendous health challenge facing our district and the nation. What changes do you want to see in the nation's healthcare system as a result of the pandemic? You have 90 seconds to respond, and in the order will be Bentz, Crumpacker, Bueller, and Atkinson. We go to Mr. Bentz first.
Thank you. So the obvious thing because of the pandemic is to recognize just how unprepared we were because we had outsourced our production of PPE to China and other places. And to put our safety and our future in the hands of folks that aren't necessarily our friends is not good. That's the nicest way I can put it. What we need to be doing is identifying each one of those places where we had failed to make sure we were able to take care of ourselves and then address those as quickly as we possibly can. When it comes to providing care, the challenge after the pandemic is much the same as before the pandemic. That what we have as healthcare is the best in the world, but is terrifically expensive. And when everybody wants it, there's the problem of how we pay for it. And so we've got to figure out a way of driving down the cost of healthcare. And this means more competition. It means we repeal Obamacare, which has been horribly ineffective when it comes to costs. We make sure that whatever we replace it with addresses pre-existing conditions. We make sure we have more doctors. We make sure we have more mid-levels. And nothing against Dr. Bueller. He's an excellent physician, but we need more of him. Maybe not necessarily more newts, but certainly more doctors. And so if we can get there, that will help drive down the cost because we'll have more people performing this service.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now we go to Mr. Crumpacker.
Thank you. Yes, I think that this is a great example of why we don't need the government running our healthcare system. I think that is a very dangerous, and I think that we do need to repeal Obamacare. I think there are a number of issues that we can work on that can bring down the cost of healthcare, which is critical. Not only having more doctors, but being able to go across state lines to buy insurance. Bringing down those regulations, I think, would be critical. And I think it is something that would really help drive down the cost. And another major issue is tort reform. We really need to stop these massive lawsuits which get doctors and they put them into these positions where their insurance is so expensive that it drives up everyone's healthcare costs. That is a major concern. And then obviously we need to figure out our medical supplies. And you cannot be relying on a country like China for your medical supplies, for your ventilators, for your drugs. This is something that is a major issue. And we are seeing the impact of the last few decades of outsourcing these critical industries. We need to bring them back. We need to have control of them again because the Chinese are really taking advantage not only of us, but others around the world. And they're trying to get goodwill. I really do believe that they are responsible for this spread, and they're trying to benefit by giving away ventilators, and that's wrong.
Thank you, Mr. Crumpacker. Now we go to Mr. Bueller.
Yeah, thank you. Great question. Certainly, I think the Trump administration has done a good job in responding both in terms of health and economic policy, passing rapid infusion of cash through the CARES Act with a bipartisan support, I think was a remarkable accomplishment. But we need and can do better. We've underinvested in our public health system for decades. That needs to be augmented so that we can test and track and treat people more effectively. We do need a better supply chain. We need to bring those manufacturing companies back on shore to make sure that we're never again dependent on China like we are and put in such a vulnerable position. I agree with Cliff Bentz. We do need more doctors, and that is crucial. We have to have more training programs, and I'd sponsor a bill to put more of those training programs in rural Oregon so those newly minted doctors and nurses come back to those rural communities. And finally, we need to hold China and the World Health Organization accountable for what happened here. We need a full-scale international investigation to determine exactly how this virus started. I think it is an odd coincidence that it started in Wuhan, where there is a lab that has been studying this coronavirus for years. I just don't buy it that it came out of a wet market. It needs to be investigated. It needs to be investigated now.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Now we go to Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you. Let me just jump to the heart of the matter. And the part of your question that is so perfect for the next Congress is that everything we used to fight about in healthcare is now gone. And so now this will be part of growing the economy again. We know on one hand, Obamacare didn't work, and on the other hand, complete free reign of insurance companies didn't work. So the solutions I am looking for is, number one, people need to have their coverage and need to be able to choose their own doctor. I know in my family and in our company, I pay double now because of some cancer in my family. I pay double for the coverage and I get less effect for my insurance. I will tell you very personally that there's a good friend of mine who's watching tonight from LeGrand, whose son got cancer. And the system broke down and it failed him. And he had to send his son to Panama in order to get the drugs that would save his life. So we have a complete breakdown between Americans who are the wealthiest nation on the planet, and yet somebody in LeGrand, Oregon had to start selling assets and moving retirement around and taking their son to a different country to get the treatment because we couldn't deliver it here. So when I talk about healthcare, for me, it's very personal. My son was born at 24 weeks old, 1 pound. My wife had cancer. This is something that I have fought for. When I was in the legislature, I worked very hard and I stood up and fought insurance companies for about 4 years to create what has become telemedicine for rural Oregon.
Thank you, Jason. So I want to thank our candidates, and I want to thank everybody that's watching from home tonight via your local newspaper's Facebook page or your local newspaper's website. A special thank you to Karen Morrison, who's watching us from the East Oregonians Facebook page. We appreciate that you're watching with us. Thanks, Karen. We're going to take a very quick 1-minute break now to hear from our sponsor, CHI St. Anthony Hospital of Pendleton. So stay right there. We'll be right back.
One afternoon at home, Mom was starting to feel a lot of tightness in her chest pains, and she also couldn't breathe. In fact, she was gasping for breath.
I was at the point where I thought I was dying.
So I called a friend who works here at St. Anthony, and she said, "You need to bring her in right away."
I was frantic. I just knew I wasn't going to make it. I was in the hospital for 6 days and had very, very good treatment the whole time. I'm very happy to St. Anthony's.
I came in feeling one way, terrified, and not knowing what to do, and leaving feeling very confident and grateful to all the staff and the doctor and everybody. It was a very positive experience, and that was thanks to St. Anthony.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Corinne Bergiotti, and this is my co-host, Chris Rush. We're here with 4 of 11 Republican candidates for Oregon's 2nd Congressional District seat: Jason Atkinson, Jimmy Crumpacker, Cliff Bentz, and Newt Bueller. Thank you all for being here with us tonight. On to our fourth question of the evening, which addresses some of our readers' concerns about the national debt. If you're elected, how would you approach helping the nation recover from the economic crisis resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic? And how do you balance the federal government's need to stimulate the economy with concerns over the increasing federal deficit? You each have 2 minutes to respond in this order. Oh, excuse me, 90 seconds to respond. Sorry about that. 90 seconds. You will respond in this order: Atkinson, Bueller, Crumpacker, and Bentz. Mr. Atkinson, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you, and thank you to the reader that sent that question in. I, right across the room here, have got a picture of Ronald Reagan that we have in our campaign office. And it was under Ronald Reagan's leadership that we moved the national debate to a balanced budget amendment. And we talked about it, we campaigned on it as Republicans, but throughout the Clinton years, that really got away from us. So let me answer the question first by saying I support a balanced budget amendment. Those of us that have served in the Oregon legislature know that we have to have a balanced budget. Now, we do have lobbyists that push and push and push to raise taxes and to move things around in such a way that we're always in a spending crisis. Let me just say I have never met a government that has ever managed money properly. I have never supported a tax, but more important than that, I have never found that the government has got its ability to feed every need. So I do believe very strongly in having a balanced budget amendment. Number two, how do you balance that? I think it's a great question. We are in uncertain times. We're in a pandemic right now. We have an economy that is not working. Government has shut down 30% of the businesses right here within a mile of this office. So we are in uncharted territory, and the federal bailout that passed last month clearly is not going to be enough. I believe there'll be another one that'll pass Congress later this summer, and probably a third one that's important. But to answer your question, I support a balanced
amendment. Newt Bueller, you have 90 seconds to respond.
Well, thank you. It's a really important question. The first step is we have to make sure that we support individuals and small businesses. Look, I have a small business that has been helped by the CARES Act. It's important to pay our employees and keep the lights on and providing some services, because the last thing we want this to turn into is going from a demand shock to our economy to a supply shock, meaning that we throw out a whole bunch of people that can provide goods and services out of business. But it's going to cost a lot. We're driving up our debt, and that's concerning. We've driven it up to levels now almost 100% of GDP. Those are historic high levels, only seen after World War II. So it's going to be important that over time we pay down that debt. The best way to do it is to have pro-growth policies, to make sure that we keep regulations limited and low, to use our federal lands appropriately. And then we need to be fiscally conservative. We need to pass a ballot budget amendment. And for crying out loud, the Congress just needs to have a budget. We need to stop these continuing spending resolutions where they just keep on spending more and more every year. We have to do it like we do at a household, where you have a limited amount of money. You have to allocate it smart. And over the next 20 to 30 years, we can pay down that debt and get it back down to a manageable level like we did after World War II. But we need strong fiscal management over the next 2 decades.
Great. Thank you, Newt. Jimmy Crumpacker, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yes, I believe that President Trump has done a remarkable job in getting these bills through Congress and really aiding small businesses, which is critical at this juncture. We need to get people back to work. That is critical. And the major thing about bringing down the debt is if you have a growing economy and you have people in work, then the debt will come down. And that is an issue that I've been very frustrated about over the last 20 years. Career politicians just seem to kick the can down the road, and our younger generations are going to have to pay the bills, and that's just not right. And so the best way to pay the debt is to have an expanding economy. And to have an expanding economy, we need to have the federal government reduce regulations. I think it's critical. And I think President Trump has done a phenomenal job. For every regulation that's come in, he's had to take 2 off the books. And that, I think, is something that is really helping the U.S. economy. And I am very concerned about our debt. As a younger person in this race, I think it's something that we can no longer ignore. And I really do believe that the president's done a phenomenal job, and the best way to reduce the debt is to grow the economy. And I think I am best placed candidate in this race because I do have experience with markets, and I do understand how markets work, and I do understand how you need to get people back to work through liquidity and through government aid. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Jimmy. Cliff Bentz, you're next.
So the challenge is, how in the world do we get our economy going again when people are scared to death of going outside and catching the virus? So what we're faced with is convincing people that it's safe. And until we do that, our small businesses aren't going to, our restaurants, stores, people aren't going to be in them if they're scared. So the question is going to be, if we're going to recover, how do we convince everybody that it's going to work and they're not going to catch the virus and possibly pass away? How do we do that? Well, the challenge we see right now coming out of Salem is that they're trying the one-size-fits-all approach, which is wrong, because there are many counties, not many, some counties, particularly in CD2, that don't have any cases at this point of the virus. And they need to be allowed to go forward more quickly. That's not happening. They should be. As far as this debt, we see some incredibly disturbing practices right now, which kind of goes like this. Hey, we can spend any amount of money and not worry about it. That's what we see happening now. Never have to worry about paying it back. That attitude has to change. And yes, I grew up on a ranch that had a lot of debt, and that's all we thought about is how to pay it off. I've had a great deal of experience paying off debt, and I'd love to try to go to DC and work on it there.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. This is the final question that is related to COVID-19. The question is, if elected, what would your approach be to balance economic recovery efforts with the social distancing measures that have been implemented to slow the spread of COVID-19? You have 90 seconds each to respond, and the order will be Bueller, Atkinson, Bentz, and Crumpacker. Mr. Bueller.
Yeah, so we need to start opening up, in my opinion, right away. Our economy's taken a considerable hit, but it has to be done in a safe fashion. The first place to start opening up is some of our rural counties that haven't had any cases, places like Harney and Lake County, counties that have sophisticated rural medical communities that you can control ingress and egress of people and have a good public health infrastructure. And gradually start reducing the social distancing protocols while you make sure that we have what I call the 5 T's covered. That means that we have to be able to trend the data to see if there's any hot spots of infections developing. We have to be able to test adequately if people are starting to get sick. Then, of course, we have to have the capacity to treat people with regards to having enough healthcare providers and personal protection equipment. And then once we do have people who might get sick, we have to trace anyone that they've come into contact. And then everyone needs to be aware that we will have to toggle back and forth, the 50, toggle back and forth between more and less social distancing until we can get a vaccine ready so that we have enough people developing herd immunity so that this can never happen again to us. And it's certainly being a physician and having deep experience in the healthcare sector, I'd love to go to Washington, D.C. and help implement that kind of plan.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Bueller. And now we go to, I believe, Mr. Crumpacker.
No, Mr. Atkinson.
Mr. Atkinson, I'm sorry. Mr. Atkinson.
No problem, Chris. As I said in my opening statement, I was the first to call on the governor to allow county commissioners working with county public health authorities to lift the restrictions. Look, there is a significant difference between Union County and Wallowa County and Umatilla County and Multnomah County. And right now, Multnomah County is making all the rules for the rest of Oregon. And I don't think that's good. I don't think closing businesses and having everyone tuned into thinking they're the next New York City or the next Portland or the next Los Angeles is the right approach. So I am for making sure that local control and local decision makers are able to make that key decision. As far as social distancing goes, where in my life and where we have been on this campaign, I will tell you that I don't know if social distancing, as we all see on national cable news, is actually that effective for all of us here. We have a very strong community in our church here in Southern Oregon. And in our church, all of a sudden, people are not going to church anymore. And for a lot of our seniors, that is their key link to other people. That is their key social touchstone. And I think it's important that people are able to have the confidence that if the coast is clear, they can go back to their lives. I think living in the fear of this is terrible. And so I believe that number one, the decision should be made locally. Number two, the governor should allow us to do that. And number three, people need to be able to go back outside.
Thank you. Now we go to Mr. Bentz.
So I think the way to talk about the question is to ask ourselves how much of our freedom we're wanting to give away. And the sad part about this is nobody really knows. And I know Newt's suggestion of his real technical and high-level approach is the medical approach, which everybody believes in. But the challenge is, how do you go to all the people in our district and say, this is the procedural way you're going to follow, and folks are going to say no, and they're going to say, hey, if we put the contact tracing in place on this particular illness, are you going to do the same thing with a common cold? Is that what's going to happen next? So let's try to figure this out, having the best people we've got, the best medical people come in and say this is what we're going to do, and then have the local community leaders step up and say, hey, you're going to be taking some risk, but we don't want to give away all of our freedom, and it may be a start, stop thing, and make sure people understand that there is risk, and then let's move forward. Life is not without risk, and freedom is not without cost. But let's move forward. Let's open the doors and have the best medical advice we can get, and make sure people know the risk they're taking, and let's move forward.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now, Mr. Crumpacker.
I think President Trump was absolutely right when he said the cure cannot be worse than the disease. And that's what we're seeing, is that we have a lot of misinformation. And the federal government has decided to shut down the entire economy with what I believe is a lack of information. We have a need to protect the people that are vulnerable, and we realize which part of the population is vulnerable, and I think it's important to protect them. We've seen different models around the world for different countries that have tried this approach, and I really believe that there are areas in Oregon that should be open right now. Certain counties should be able to have that responsibility for themselves. I think time will tell that Kate Brown's approach to this was wrong, and the fact that she is politicizing this matter and really trying to blame the Trump administration is shameful. I mean, this is not something that should be politicized, and we are really taking too much of a risk with our economy. And I think that it's important to open back up as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Jimmy. So that wraps up our COVID questions, and we're going to move along to question number 6, which I think is one of the most important questions of the evening. The most effective legislators in Congress often accomplish their goals by working with members of the other political party. What issues are you personally willing to cross party lines to address? You have 90 seconds, each in this order. Jimmy Crumpacker, Newt Buehler, Jason Atkinson, and Cliff Bentz. We'll start with you, Jimmy.
It's a great question. I am very principled conservative, but I think that there are some issues that I can agree with people on the other side of the aisle. Specifically, our issue that we need to respond to China. The fact that the Chinese hid this disease and it has affected the entire world and virtually brought our economy to a halt needs to be addressed. The University of Southampton just came out with a study that said if the Chinese had reacted in a proper fashion and had allowed investigators in from America, 95% of cases would not have occurred. There's a perfect example in Taiwan, in the fact that they tried to warn the World Health Organization in December about this, but they were blocked because the Chinese have the power to hold Taiwan out of the World Health Organization. And I believe that Democrats can agree with me on this issue. We need to take on China because this is very dangerous what they have done. They have basically shut down our economy by being irresponsible. And I think that President Trump and I will be able to take on the Chinese, and I think that the Democrats will join us in this effort because their actions have been irresponsible. There's no two ways around it. I think that these are some issues that I can work with the Democrats on. Thank you.
Thanks, Jimmy. Newt Bueller.
I will cross party lines and work with the Democrats as long as the issues benefit the people in the places in the 2nd Congressional District while upholding my conservative values of freedom, equality of opportunity, the rule of law, and limited government. And I do think there is a wonderful opportunity to cross party lines and do a thorough investigation of China's role in this whole pandemic and the World Health Organization, which has been a troublesome agency of the United Nations for decades. We pay 10 times more into the World Health Organization than any other nation in the world, and we have very little say right now, and that needs to stop. And look, in the Oregon legislature, I had a lot of successes crossing party lines. I wrote and passed a bill called Right to Try, which allows people to use experimental life-saving medications that President Trump passed a very similar bill at the federal level. I've worked across party lines to deal with the opioid epidemic, which has ravaged parts of this state. And I certainly crossed party lines and worked with Democrats to call out fraud, abuse, and corruption. So as long as these policies benefit the people of the 2nd Congressional District and are consistent with my conservative values that I feel strongly about, then yeah, I'm more than willing to work with others.
Thank you, Newt. Jason Atkinson, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you very much. Let me answer the question by telling you that one of my core beliefs is that politics is a relational business. It is all based on relationships forged over years, often through difficulty, in order to gain trust and respect with people. And so to answer your question very specifically, I will cross party lines to work on mental health. I will cross party lines to work on forest management. There are a lot of conservative Democrats in the South that have similar forest issues that we have here in Oregon. I will work across party lines with conservative Democrats to make sure that President Trump's tax cuts to the individuals are made permanent. Right now, only the corporate side is permanent, but the individual tax cuts are not. That's something we can start to work on and hopefully get through as a Republican majority in the House soon. I will work very hard on healthcare across the aisle. It will take the entire Congress to actually work together in order to make sure that healthcare works for friends of mine, like I'd mentioned in La Grande, who had to go out of the country to get cancer treatment. That's got to stop. And in order to do that, you need to have strong relationships. I will work across the aisle, again, with Democrats in other states to make sure that we're opening new markets for agriculture products around the world. There is a tremendous amount of work that you have to do to be a successful member of Congress that involves getting your hands dirty with people and having relationships with people.
Thank you, Jason. Cliff Bentz, you're next.
So I'll just mention, having spent 12 years in Salem, never in the majority, that it's much more attractive to work across party lines when you're in the minority. because you're not going to get much done unless you do. So, but frankly, I'd rather be in the majority. Just saying, I'd like to try that out for once. And so I'm hopeful that our president will get reelected, that the Senate will stay Republican, and perhaps the House will flip. Now, then I wouldn't have to worry quite as much about having to cross party lines. I do think that the reason you cross party lines is because your folks, your people in your district are in danger and need to be protected. That's why you cross party lines. And the examples that Jason was just getting, healthcare, tax cuts, those kinds of things are exactly what we want to protect, and they all help our district. The one though that comes to mind, there are actually two that come to mind that certainly I would cross party lines. One's amending Endangered Species Act. It needs to be fixed. It's hurting people in our district. It's not balanced. So of course I cross party lines to fix the Endangered Species Act. Fire and timber. Fire is putting our people in danger. It's putting our cities at risk. Of course, we're going to cross party lines to try to help there. And finally, water. When it comes to trying to save our communities, of course, I cross party lines to try to help with water.
Great. Thank you, Cliff. We're getting ready to go to another short commercial break, but again, we want to just thank everybody that's watching out there via their local newspaper's Facebook page and their websites.
In fact, we've got Rachel Wheeler watching on the Bend Bulletin Facebook page. Welcome, Rachel. Thank you for
Rachel.
Watching. Okay. Now we're going to go take another quick commercial break, so please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Chris Rush with Corinne Brigiotti, and we're here with 4 candidates for Oregon CD2 seat: Jimmy Crumpacker, Jason Atkinson, Newt Bueller, and Cliff Benz. Thank you, gentlemen, for being here with us tonight. Now we're ready to move on to our 7th question, and it is: tribal nations within the 2nd District have called for the removal of dams to restore salmon populations, which would need congressional approval. How would you approach this issue? You each have 90 seconds to respond in this order: Atkinson, Crumpacker, Bentz, and Bueller. We start with Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you very much for the question, Chris and Corinne. I have stood and will continue to stand against the removal of any dam on the Columbia and Snake River. I have stood there. If you look and Google me back for 20 years, I have been very consistent there. On the Klamath River, which I'm sure is going to come up from some of my colleagues, that is a different situation. On the Klamath, we worked very hard. My family has been there for over 90 years, so this is more than political for me. This is personal. We have worked to stand with agriculture, and there was an agreement that was first brought up by President George W. Bush. It eventually evolved into what became the largest peacemaking solution to the water war, in which agriculture would be given a guaranteed floor of water and have their power rates capped. And part of the removal was a dam in the state of California. None of the dams, contrary to what you might hear, none of the dams on the Klamath have anything to do with agriculture. They don't store any water for ag. They don't make power. They're no longer owned by PacifiCorp. But that deal did blow up. And that deal was also supported by Congressman Greg Walden. So W supported it, Walden supported it. My family has worked on it for a long time, and the deal still blew up. And that deal has left farmers today with almost no water. As of today, we live under a drought, and Klamath irrigators are not going to have even as much water as they had last year, and their power rates have gone up 1,000%.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. Now we go to Mr. Crumpacker.
Well, I think that Oregon has the best dams out there, and we are very fortunate. And I don't think that the federal government should be meddling with our dams. I think that not only our dams in the Klamath Basin, but on the Snake and the Columbia provide an incredible cheap source of power, which drives industry, which drives jobs, which drives our economy and our schools. I think removing any dam is a major mistake. I cannot side with any radical environmentalists on this. I'm sorry. I don't believe that removing dams is the answer. And it's a huge mistake, really. Energy infrastructure is critical, not only to the United States, but to Oregon. And it gives us a huge advantage, not only over other countries, but over other states. And I do believe that, that hydroelectricity is renewable. And it's something that we cannot even start the discussion. It's non-negotiable, not only for the power, but also for the infrastructure which provides irrigation for our farmers. That is a critical component to dams. Not only that, but dams also allow for firefighting, because it's much easier to go in and dip a helicopter and go fight a forest fire if a dam is there to provide a water source close by. So
thank you, Mr. Crumpacker.
I have to caution people about removing dams. I think it's a huge mistake.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Go now to Mr. Bentz.
So I'm a no on dam removal. I want that to be very clear. The value of dams is incredible. Whether it's, I'm going to just go to the Columbia system for a moment in the Snake and look at the wheat that comes down through those systems. Look at the communities that rely upon that transport system. Look at the communities that would actually be destroyed if we took out those dams. Not to mention the value that goes with having the balancing that's provided by the water behind those dams for green power, which people, I don't know how they can possibly not understand that those dams are actually huge batteries that you can draw down at a whim, if you will. But of course, that's not how it's done. But when the wind isn't blowing, then you can run your water through the dams. When it is blowing, you can hold it back. That balancing capability is incredibly important to the green power future so many environmentalists talk about. So why anybody would talk about removing dams when we have so many other ways now of managing fish passage? I was on the Fish Passage Task Force years ago and helped work on new ways of managing passage. I was on the Columbia River Governance Commission, where we dealt with the treaty negotiations that are going on with Canada and worked within that system and saw just how wonderful it is and what a huge benefit is for the Northwest having low power costs. No, we're not taking out the dam.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now to Mr. Bueller.
Yeah, thank you. Look, I don't think we should ever put fish before people, before ranchers and farmers. And unfortunately, due to technical difficulty, I couldn't hear Jason Atkinson's answer, who I've differed with Jason with regards to his advocacy for removal of dams on the Klamath River system. I don't think it's a wise thing to do for all the reasons that Cliff Bentz and Jimmy Crumpacker have outlined. Plus, I have great concerns about the cost of that. I think they're markedly underestimated, probably by $500 to $700 million. There's also countless environmental concerns when you start tearing down the dams in terms of the toxins and the sediment that are behind those dams. And then who sustains and holds that liability when you start taking down these dams? So it's overall a really bad idea. We need to be looking at other ways to help our fish population. Let's control the sea lion population. Let's control the cormorant population. Let's have more cooperative agreements between people who aren't using the allocated amount of water, and that's something that's been done successfully in the Deschutes River Basin, where there is irrigation units that don't use their full allocation, and there's become a vigorous trading system. So there's much more commonsensical ideas to help our fish populations than tearing down dams, which will be very costly and have significant negative environmental impact.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Our 8th question addresses climate change. Do you believe the planet is undergoing man-made climate change, and what, if anything, should the federal government do about it? You each have 90 seconds, and in this order: Newt Bueller, Jimmy Crumpacker, Jason Atkinson, and Cliff Bentz. Mr. Bueller, go ahead and begin.
Certainly, I believe in climate change. We can debate the causes of it, but what I am absolutely against is big government solutions like the Green New Deal at the federal level or cap and trade at the state level. Look, these are just power and money grabs by overzealous government. They'll make the situation a lot worse, and importantly, they'll just take millions and millions of dollars out of the pockets of hardworking Oregonians and do very little, if anything, to help our environment. There are things, though, common sense things that we can do to help an environment. We can start by controlling these massive forest fires on federal lands that we see all too often in the summer months. We can start by encouraging carbon sequestration. And you know, the best technology that's ever been invented to sequester carbon? That's a tree. Let's start harvesting some of our trees, put them in mass timber buildings. That's a wonderful way to sequester carbon and bring it out of our atmosphere. And then importantly, let's hold the Chinese accountable for their building of countless coal-fired electrical generation plants. Let's put tariffs on some of their products if they continue to do that, and let's sell them cheap, clean, low natural gas out of a terminal that's built in Coos Bay, Oregon. That will help the environment and specifically help our economies in many of our hurting counties in Oregon.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Mr. Crumpacker, you have 90 seconds.
Thank you. Yes, this is a frustrating question for me, especially if you look at the evidence that we've seen over the last year or so. Obviously, this year's different, but we're at a 67-year low for energy uses per person in the United States. We have reduced our coal usage by 50% because we've allowed the market to decide. And in Oregon, we are one of the cleanest states in the country. So this is an incredibly frustrating question for me, especially because I believe that forest management is so critical. You know, if you look at the forest fires that happened in 2018 in California, the amount of carbon that was released was the equivalent to the entire energy business in California. If you look at Australia, in the last 3 months of 2019, the amount of carbon that was released was equivalent to 75% of all the carbon released by the rest of the economy. So if you stop the forest fires, you would have an absolute impact on carbon. And the Chinese, the fact that they are burning 50% of the world's coal is very frustrating. Not to mention all of South Asia is burning 75% of the world's coal. And the Chinese are not slowing down. They're planning to build 300 to 500 new coal-fired plants in the next 10 years. And they're not taking any responsibility. You literally cannot breathe the air if you go to Beijing. If you see the pictures there, it's scary. And the only time that we're anywhere close to that in Oregon is when the forest fires are burning.
Thank you, Jimmy. Jason Atkinson, you're next.
Thank you. Let me answer the question by saying, no, I don't believe that climate change is man-made. I have had the good fortune to have traveled in many places on this planet, and I will tell you that when you go to Beijing, China, everyone has been wearing masks over their face for 2 decades. And the reason is that the Gobi Desert and their pollution has completely destroyed all the air quality in that town. If you go to New Delhi and you see the absolute pollution that happens on a daily basis, You can't point at the United States and look at what we have already done and say that we are the leaders in global warming, because it's simply not the fact. In Southern Oregon and in Eastern Oregon, we live in actually one of the cleanest places on planet Earth. And so when government comes and says that we're going to raise our taxes and we're going to do things for rural Oregon, in fact, to fix a problem that many of us don't believe we've created, I certainly will stand with the side of the people. Let me finish this answer with this. I have a son, he's 17 years old. He drives my old truck, an old F-150. It's got 200,000 miles on it. I hope it makes it all the way through college for him. But let's say that in 10 years from now, my son will probably be able to buy another used American-made truck that is probably a hybrid. And if that happens, that's because the market did it. And the market did it is because the market demanded it. And that is the kind of leadership that the world needs from the United States. It's capitalism.
Thank you, Jason. Cliff Bentz, 90 seconds.
So sure, the climate is changing. The question is, what degree is man the cause of it? We can debate that for a long time. The challenge with this change is that there are many people who think they should immediately do a top-down design, control everybody's system to address it, and that's what cap and trade was and is, and that's what we walked out over. The reason, of course, was we don't want to see all energy in Oregon controlled by, in this case, folks appointed by Kate Brown. It was ridiculous, and it deserved to be shot down, and we did so by walking out and robbing the Democrats of the opportunity to pass such a crazy system. Can you imagine how what would we be doing right now if we had a 22-cent a gallon increase in gas looking us in the face coming up just a few short months from now? That's the kind of thing that would have happened had cap and trade passed. And using climate change as an excuse for this kind of crazy legislation is simply wrong. And it's too bad. The coal to clean bill was the same thing. It should have been called money to big utilities bill, a bad bill. It should not have passed, and now everybody's paying for something that's not happening. Coal is still being burned and will be for another, I think, 9 or 10 years. So this is being used as an excuse for an awful lot of laws that we don't need.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. The ninth question is, the 2nd District covers more than 19 counties in Oregon, which is 2/3 of the state's landmass. How have you connected with the people and issues in this vast district? And how would you stay connected if you're elected and sent to Washington, D.C.? You have 90 seconds to respond, and the order is Crumpacker, Bentz, Bueller, and Atkinson. Mr. Crumpacker.
Yes, well, I have to say that my favorite part of this entire campaign was being out on the road. We put on 10,000 miles plus over the first month or two in this race, and we held hundreds of meetings, and it was the best time. I really enjoyed it. Going out and listening to people, I think that is really critical, because you're right, this is a massive district, and people have different issues across the district, and being able to go and listen and respond and get insights is critically important. I plan to have a staff once elected that is in touch regularly with my constituents, and I think that is important. You have to have great interaction with your constituents, and I plan to be in every county multiple times a year in order to listen to the people in this district and try to appreciate their problems and try to come up with solutions together. I think that's critical. I would like to follow in Greg Wallen's footsteps. I think he's been great about having a great staff across the state. I think he's done a terrific job. And so I love being out there. I want to hold as many meetings as possible. And this has been a frustrating part to the virus. So I did enjoy those first couple months, though. Being out there, talking with people and listening, I think is critical. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crumpacker. And now we go to Mr. Bentz.
Well, I live in the district, so it's pretty normal for me to be in it, and traveling around from place to place is something I've done for the last 12 years since I had the largest state representative district in CD2, and then I had the largest Senate district in CD2. So I'm very accustomed to driving 5 hours for a 1 hour meeting and driving back, or driving down to the Klamath, taking 11 and a half hours to get there and back, and 700 miles in a day. I do this. I know how to do it, and I enjoy it, actually. And as I drive, I see many of the rivers and streams that I dealt with when I was on the Water Resource Commission for those 8 years. And I also see many ranches and farms that I represented in my law practice. And I see my relatives who are scattered all across CD2. And so, it's like home, because, well, it is home. And I've lived up here for my entire life. And of course, my family's been in CD2 for 100 years. So I don't enter in staying in contact with the district because I live here. And these people are my friends, my neighbors, my constituents, and previously my legal clients. I look forward to it. I look forward to following in Greg Walton's footsteps and meeting with folks at least, perhaps not once a year, but I'll sure try.
Thank you, Mr. Bentz. Now we go to Mr. Bueller.
Like Mr. Bentz, I've lived in this district for over 2 decades. I've run businesses. I have volunteered. I've paid taxes. I've voted here. And I've done clinics in Burns and John Day, in Lakeview on occasion. I have deep roots in this district. I enjoy being out, meeting people, listening to learn, hearing the concerns, the hopes, the fears, the desires. And I do think that Greg Walton has set a very high bar for any of us who would follow in his footsteps. And to be quite frank, I would shamelessly copy what Greg's done. He has a reputation for having an open door, for communicating, just showing up. And I can tell you, I'd be the same kind of congressman. But I also think with this coronavirus, we've learned a lot. We've learned a lot about technology and how we can leverage technology like we're using tonight with Zoom conferencing, with telephone town halls. And those are all technologies that unfortunately I've had to use during this campaign, during the stay-at-home order. So there is a silver lining in all of this, that I and many other people have become much more comfortable with this technology. And when I am stuck in Washington, D.C., I think we can use those to reach out and really play a more hands-on role and listen to even more people. So a small silver lining with regards to the stay-at-home order, that's for sure.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. Now we go to Mr. Atkinson.
Could you restate the question? I've heard so many answers, I might have lost your question.
Okay. With the vastness of this district in the 19 counties, how have you been able to connect with voters and stay on top of the issues? And how would you do that if you were sent to Washington, how would you maintain that connection to this district?
Thank you very much. And the only thing you left out in your question is that there's 2 time zones here. Let me answer your question first by saying hunting and fishing is how I have got a lifetime of friendships. And that's how I have connected with people, not because of politics, but because I hunt ducks in the Warner Valley in Lake County, because I've guided on the Deschutes, because I've hunted in Umatilla County, I've hunted in Wallowa County, I've hunted and fished a lot, more than I should admit, in Union County. And my relationships through hunting and fishing have led to me working in little communities like Plush to get them an ambulance to work with people. And I married a girl who went to OIT in Klamath Falls. I went to Southern Oregon. We are people who worked hard to put ourselves through school. And I know that this job is about coming home not a couple of times a year, it's coming home every weekend and connecting with people. As I said in an earlier answer, politics is about relationships. And the only way to have a relationship is to be there. And this means on the weekends, if you are a member of Congress, you are traveling and you are driving and you are in Baker City and you are in LeGrand and you are in every place that asks for your help. And so that's how I'll do it. I was a Fish and Wildlife Commissioner for the for the 2nd Congressional District. And I made sure that we had commission meetings all over the 2nd Congressional District for that very reason. Bring government to the people. And that's the kind of congressman I'll be.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you, Jason. We also want to take some time to thank all of our viewers at home watching on your Facebook pages and on our newspaper websites, including Jim McMahon, who is watching us via Facebook for Eastern Oregon Alive TV. So thanks, Jim. We're glad you're watching with us tonight.
And we've also got Earl Binger watching the Blue Mountain Eagle on their Facebook page.
Yeah.
Thank you, Earl.
Okay, it's time for another brief commercial break. Please stay with us and you'll hear more from our candidates after we return.
We are local newspapers in print
and online in our websites and news apps.
We protect democracy
by asking the tough questions
and holding those in authority accountable.
We give a voice to the voiceless
and hold government entities to a high standard.
We support the communities that support us.
Encourage economic vitality.
And open up dialogue on important issues.
We make people laugh.
And sometimes make people cry.
And inspire people to get involved.
We introduce you to new people, places, and businesses.
And honor our community's unique history.
We have opinions based on our research.
And we label them as such.
Newspapers are the glue that holds a community together.
Local journalism, locally owned.
We're your neighbors.
And we care about our communities, just like you do.
We are EO Media Group, and we approve this message.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Chris Rush and Corinne Brajati here. And we are here with 4 of the Republican candidates for the 2nd Congressional District seat in Congress. They are Cliff Bentz, Newt Buehler, Jason Atkinson, and Jimmy Crumpacker.
We're now going to go on to a quick question that was submitted by a newspaper reader. Are you in favor of abolishing the Electoral College, and why or why not? You have just 60 seconds for this one. The order is Atkinson, Buehler, Bentz, and Crumpacker. Jason, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I am a constitutionalist. I support the Electoral College. I think the Electoral College was put into place by our founding fathers to protect small states. And it gives small states, Oregon only has 4 million people that live here. It gives us the same voice as it does other states. And so the founding fathers wanted to make sure that the cities who produce a lot more members of Congress than the legislature because of their population wouldn't have total control over our national elections. So I support the Electoral College. I don't believe in any liberal ploy to move that power base away from rural states and to move it to more populated states. I think it's important that Oregon be heard not only in the halls of Congress, but that Oregon be heard in our presidential races.
Thank you, Jason. Newt Buehler, you have 60 seconds.
No, I'm absolutely against abolishing the Electoral College. Look, I believe that being a true conservative means upholding the original intent of our founding fathers. And the Electoral College is something that they gave a lot of thought to, is carefully crafted. And the intent was to balance the power structure between the urban areas and the rural areas. We have way too much power imbalance already between urban and rural, especially in the state of Oregon. So absolutely, I am against abolishing the Electoral College. And I think it's just one of many examples where we need to hold steadfast, uphold the founding principles of this country that has made us one of the greatest nation on earth.
Thank you, Newt. Cliff.
Opposed to abolishing the Electoral College, and of course, we had a bill like that in session just passed, and I voted against it. So my folks who just went before me did an excellent job. They should teach con law. This takes me back to my days in law school, and I'll just say I don't want to go back to my days in law school, but I do absolutely support the continuation of the Electoral College for the reasons already given. And all this discussion about how we're going to shift over to this democracy thing takes away from the fact ignores the fact that we're a republic, and that there was a good reason that people wanted to have elected representatives and wanted to have the types of very carefully constructed controls in place, such as the Electoral College. So of course I'm opposed to it heavily.
Thank you, Cliff. Jimmy Crumpacker, you have 60 seconds.
No, I am not in favor of removing the Electoral College. This is patently ridiculous, to be honest with you. And it really, this movement started because people were disappointed with election results. At the end of the day, you have to win in the system that was created by our founders. And to try to go back and change the system now doesn't make any sense to me. And as my other candidates, my fellow candidates have said, and I agree with them, this really does favor the major cities and population centers over the rural areas. And I don't think that's right, and I don't think that that's what the founders wanted. So no, I think that this is patently ridiculous, and it really is just stems from a movement of people that feel as though their candidate didn't win the presidential race, and it's a disappointing movement, to be honest with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crumpacker. And now we have a question submitted by email from David and Alice Drescher of Sun River. And their question is, if you were elected to represent the 2nd District, are you willing to represent all, their emphasis, all the people in your district, whether you agree with them politically or not? Please respond in 60 seconds. The order will be Crumpacker, Atkinson, Benson, Bueller. Mr. Crumpacker.
Yeah, it's a great question, and absolutely. I think we can all agree that we root for America. Whether you're on the left or the right, we want America to do the best it can do. And that means having a phenomenal economy, being safe, knowing that we are safe in our homes. And these are things that we can agree with. And there's certain other issues that I think that everyone can agree with on. So yes, I would certainly want to work with all my constituents, and there are certain things that we can definitely all agree on. And I really want everyone to know that I will be there and listen to them. Even if we disagree on policy, I think listening is key. And I would be more than willing to have an exchange of ideas and try to convince them that a free market, constitutionalist-based philosophy is the best thing for America. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crumpacker. And now we go to Mr. Atkinson.
Thank you very much for the question. The answer is absolutely. For 14 years, I forged a relationship and a reputation of doing the finest constituent service in Salem. And I worked with Democrats, I worked with independents, I worked with people who in the district, many of which didn't vote for me, but you have to know this, the person who wrote the question. You never call a member of Congress with good news. You only call a member of Congress when your lawyer can't fix it, when your pastor can't fix it, and when you're upset at somebody and nobody can fix it. And so you call a member. And it's not whether or not you agree with them or not. Somebody not getting their Social Security check really is not an issue. That is about a service providing. It's really important that anybody who is serving has an open door and works for all the people. I will tell you, as the writer is in from Sun River, I was there 2 days ago. A good friend of mine had passed away, somebody who was completely not political at all. And I was up there with the family, and in that family, it's called the Ministry of Presence. It's just being there. And they weren't all Republicans, and they weren't all supporters of mine. They were all probably couldn't even vote in the primary, but it was important for me to be there. And I think that is the kind of heart that I have. I believe in servant leadership, and that's the kind of
cut you off there. Now we go to Mr. Bentz.
Represent all of the constituents in the district, but that's what you're elected to do. And it starts with what we heard Jason say, also Jimmy. You listen as carefully as you can to what the problems are, and you try to help. Everything is not political. Many of the things that you deal with in the legislature, and I'm sure the calls I made to Greg Walden, many of times had nothing to do with politics. They had everything to do with just everyday problems, and that needed to be fixed. The veterans in particular, Greg did a wonderful job for the veterans, and I would hope to be able to follow in his footsteps, because you don't ask a veteran if they were Republican or a Democrat. You go, hey, what can I do to help? And that's what I would be doing. I'm supported by many different folks, Republican, Democrat, Independent. They support me because I listen and then I try to help. And I've also been blessed with a wonderful staff member of one, and thank God she was with me, because we did great things for my constituents. I tend to do the same in Congress.
Now to Mr. Bueller.
Yeah, absolutely. A great question. The good news is I already have experience doing this. I represented a district in Bend that had nearly equal members, Democrat, Republicans, and independents. And like my colleagues have said, a lot of this job is about constituent services, helping people with their unemployment claim, with their difficulties with Medicare, with their veterans benefits. And it's important, no matter what the politics, that you separate that from the policy and the constituent services that you have to deliver. It's crucial. And part of that is always having an open door, calling people back, and importantly, listening. I grow frustrated when I hear these stories when I was in the legislature of other lawmakers' offices that wouldn't answer the phone for days on end. And then many times our office would get called because of lack of a response. So having a good team that will support the member of Congress is crucial in getting this job done.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. And thank all of you. I want to mention that we've had a number of other questions submitted via email and Facebook about the Second Amendment, the judicial nomination process, immigration, and the Endangered Species Act among them. Clearly, these are all issues that Second District voters care about. And so we hope that candidates will address each of these issues on their campaign websites and social media pages as the campaign goes along. As we won't have time here tonight to get into any of these questions, we'll move on to the final stage.
Okay, yeah, we are running out of time tonight, so we'll be moving on to closing statements from the Republican candidates for the 2nd Congressional District seat in the U.S. Congress.
Don't forget that Election Day is May 19th. Ballots were mailed out starting on the 29th, April 29th. So you'll be receiving yours in the mail soon if you haven't already. Oregon is a vote by mail state, so the coronavirus pandemic will not prevent registered voters from casting their ballots.
That's right. Oregon will not be facing the challenges that many states who require in-person voting are having right now. So for your closing statements, please take the time to tell the viewers why they should vote for you in the May 19th primary election. Your time limit is just 60 seconds, and the order is Atkinson, Bentz, Bueller, and Crumpacker. Jason, why don't you lead us off?
Thank you, Chris and Corinne. My name's Jason Atkinson. I would be humbled to be your member of Congress and to serve you. I've got a long track record of not only being consistently conservative, but also putting people first and doing the very best constituent service. I have an A+ rating with the NRA. I actually hunt and fish. I have calluses on my hands, and I was on a tractor today for 8 hours getting ready for this debate. I believe that we have to reelect the president. I believe very strongly that as a member of Congress, I can come back in the majority, and the Republicans can win, in fact, win the majority in Congress. I believe we have to grow the economy. I believe we have to make President Trump's tax cuts permanent. I'm Jason Atkinson. I am pro-life. I am consistently conservative. I'm an A+ with the NRA, and I support the president's judicial nominations, all of them. I would appreciate your vote. My website, jasonatkinson4congress.com. It would be an honor to serve you, and I believe in servant leadership. That is, serve first.
Thank you, Jason. Cliff Bentz, you have 60 seconds.
Well, thank you both for your patience. Folks, over the years, I've defended the water and property and Second Amendment rights of folks in my district. I've become a friend and admirer of Congressman Greg Walden. I would build on his excellent record. I've always upheld our Constitution. I'll do everything I need to do, have to do, to defend my friends, family, and those in our district. Of course, I had a chance to prove that last year when I walked out to stop a perfectly horrid cap and trade bill, not to mention an attack on our Second Amendment bill, which we also killed. If I elected me, you'd be sending one of your own to Washington, D.C. I've got the battle scars to prove that I can and will do whatever it takes to fight for you, for our way of life and the values we hold so dear. I'm Cliff Bentz. I'm asking for your vote. You can go to cliffbentz.com and read more about my background and where I stand on the issues. Thank you so much for your patience and listening to us tonight.
Thank you, Cliff. Newt Bueller, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Well, thanks, Chris and Corinne, for hosting and moderating. I know sometimes it's challenging with this technology. Look, no one in this race has fought Kate Brown and the liberal establishment in this state tougher than I have, and I stand ready to be with President Trump in Washington, D.C. to carry the fight to Nancy Pelosi, to defend our Second Amendment, to push back on excessive taxes and regulation, to secure our border and end illegal immigration. It would be my honor to be your representative in Congress, to stand up and fight for the things that we hold dear as Americans and Oregonians. I ask for your vote, and I greatly appreciate the opportunity to serve the people of the 2nd Congressional District.
Thank you, Newt. Jimmy Crumpacker, you have 60 seconds for your closing statement.
Well, thank you very much for your time tonight. I appreciate you holding this forum, and I want to thank everyone for letting us into your homes. What you need to know about me is, unlike all the other candidates, I am not a career politician. But what I am is a staunch supporter of President Trump, and I have been from the beginning. What I also am is a defender of the Second Amendment. Oregon Firearms Federation believes that I'm the best candidate in this election. And I am also staunchly pro-life. This is something that is non-negotiable. And Oregon Right to Life also endorsed me. These are organizations that believe that I am the best person to go to Washington, D.C. and defend our values and our way of life. I also agree with the president. We need to defend our border. We need a strong border and end sanctuary cities. Thank you very much. My name is Jimmy Crumpacker, and I would ask for your vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Crumpacker, and thank you all for participating in this forum this evening, which has been hosted by the EO Media Group and EO Alive TV. Special thank you to CHI St. Anthony Hospital of Pendleton, Pac West Communications for their generous support. And a special thanks to CHI St. Anthony Hospital and Pac West for their support again. And we especially want to recognize the producers of these events, Catherine Brown, Brent Clapp, and the crew of Brent Clapp Productions, Director Sean Halliday, Assistant Director Bennett Welch, and all of those behind the scenes. If you missed the other 2 live forums, don't fear. You can view them, the videos, on your newspaper's website under the Multimedia tab, or on your newspaper's Facebook page. Those will remain up and active for quite some time. Just look under the videos tab or online at eoalive.tv.
Thank you to everyone who joined us tonight, to our candidates, and to those of you watching at home. Have a great night.
Thank you. All right. Good job. Yay.